Hey guys, it's Chris. From bloodthirsty fighters in feudal Japan and ancient Native American empires to noble gladiators who refused to be freed, here are 10 of the most badass warriors of all time. Number 10. Telowickle. Telowickle was a Tlaxcalteca general who lived in the pre-16th century of what is now Mexico. It's said that this brutal warrior was captured by the Aztecs, but soon integrated into their community and became part of their clan. While nobody really knows why this savage warrior stayed with his captives, some claim it was because the women of the Aztecs all loved him. This was an understandable motivator for him to remain with his captors and become part of their nation. At some point, Telowickle was promoted to be the commander of one of the Aztec armies. The legends say he was so large and powerful that none of the other soldiers could lift any of his weapons because they were just too heavy. However, when the Aztecs went to war with the Tlaxcala, the original tribe of Telowickle, he refused to fight for the Aztecs against his own people. He was also not allowed to go back to his own people to fight against the Aztecs. For this reason, he was stuck in the middle and had nowhere to go. Rather than fight against his clan, he requested to be given a warrior's death. This meant he was to fight as a gladiator until he died. But this was no easy feat for such a brutal warrior. He could not lay down and be killed, and so he fought back, and he killed 8 eagle warriors and wounded another 20 before he was finally taken down. It's claimed that after his death, Telowickle's heart was cut out by a high Aztec priest and sacrificed to the gods. What a legendary and savage soldier. I mean, I could never imagine being involved in that kind of armed combat, could you? What would you do? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. There's lots of amazing videos coming out every week, and you don't want to miss even one. Number 9. Galvadino. The story of Galvadino is extremely old. He was a Mapuche warrior who lived during the 1500s in South America. The army of Spanish conquistadors captured several thousand Mapuche Indians during the Battle of Lagunas, which took place in the land that is now part of modern-day Chile. The Spanish leader ordered his troops to cut off the right hand and nose of every warrior they captured. Unfortunately for Galvadino, he had both his hands cut off because he was the leader. This was done as a message to the Mapuche, a warning for them to give up or else they would meet horrible ends. In the case of Galvadino, the story goes that he offered up his hands to be cut off without even blinking. He then asked to be killed, but his captors denied his request. Instead, Galvadino and a few dozen other warriors were freed in order to tell their general to surrender, thus preventing further bloodshed. Instead of doing that, Galvadino continued to fight the Spanish intruders. But of course, he had no hands. It didn't do too much good to fight the enemy with no hands, so before the next attack, Galvadino fastened knives to both of his wrists. He basically turned himself into a real-life version of Edward Scissorhands. A month after he'd been captured and released, Galvadino fought at the Battle of Millarapque. The Mapuche lost dramatically to the Spanish commander Mendoza, and Galvadino was captured yet again. Despite cutting down many men with his scissor hands, Galvadino was captured and sentenced to hang. Even today, Galvadino's story speaks volumes of the determination and fearsomeness of the Mapuche warriors of South America. These were not guys you would ever want to mess with. Number 8. Spartacus. There's no warrior in history more famous than Spartacus. He was a Thracian gladiator who led a slave revolt with an enormous army against the Roman forces. Spartacus led his men up and down the Italian peninsula, defeating dozens of Roman attacks and earning his place as the most badass warrior in history. Today, you can find a marble statue of Spartacus at the Louvre Museum in Paris. He's immortalized in movies and TV and will likely continue to thrive in popular culture forever. But the truth of Spartacus's life is actually a little vague. According to Life Science, most experts agree that Spartacus was from Thrace, a small area in the southeast of Europe that the Romans subjugated during the 1st century BC. Spartacus likely served in the Roman auxiliary, at some point deserted and likely became a bandit, and then was later captured and brought to Rome, where he was sold as a slave. Just like in the TV series, Spartacus was taken to a gladiator school in Capua, 120 miles south of Rome. And while at the school, Spartacus helped to organize a breakout of about 70 gladiators, all of whom escaped armed with knives and other makeshift weapons from the kitchen. Here, Spartacus went on to build a massive army that was able to challenge the very might of Rome. However, his revolt eventually came to an end, and Spartacus was killed in battle in April of 71 BC. To this day, he's widely regarded as one of the toughest and most impressive warriors of all time. Number 7. Miyamoto Musashi. Miyamoto Musashi was born in the year of the monkey, 1584. And unlike Spartacus, Miyamoto was a samurai wizard. It's unlikely that he actually practiced magic, but he did teach himself the art of swordplay from a very young age. By the time Miyamoto was 13 years old, he was traveling around Japan and challenging grown men to sword duels. As the legend goes, Miyamoto's father was also a swordsman and a martial artist. Scholars are unsure whether Miyamoto learned much of how to sword fight from his father, but there is an agreement about Miyamoto's bathing habits. The legend claims that he never bathed because he did not want to be taken by surprise and killed while bathing, so he just decided not to. Though his stench likely distracted his opponents in battle, which gave him another advantage. It's claimed that throughout Miyamoto's life he had over 60 duels and never suffered a single loss, which would make him one of the best swordsmen to have ever picked up a blade. He even wrote a book about how to handle a sword so that others could learn from his secrets. It's rumored that he gave his brother the book before he died in the year 1645. It was later translated to English in 1974 and has been deeply studied. Miyamoto Musashi perished with his walking cane in one hand and his sword in the other, and his violent life gifted him a prominent place in Japanese history as one of the most impressive swordsmen of all time. Number 6. Flamma. Flamma, or the Flame, was a Roman soldier born as Marcus Calpurnius Flamma. He fought in the First Punic War, leading over 300 soldiers straight into the heart of Carthage on a brutal rescue mission. Carthage was once a major city in the old days of the Roman Empire, and is now a small town in the northern African country of Tunisia. Back during the first of several wars between the Carthaginians and the Romans, this mission failed and nearly all of Flamma's men were killed in battle. The legend goes that Flamma was pulled out from under the massive pile of his dead soldiers and then taken prisoner and sent to a gladiator school as his punishment. From here, things get a little bizarre. It turned out there were two things that Flamma loved quite a bit. The first was being famous, and the second was fighting. He found his niche as a brutal gladiator and refused to stop fighting. Nobody even needed to force him to fight. In drastic contradiction to Spartacus, Flamma had no desire for liberation. Even after Flamma won his freedom by defeating his enemies in the ring, he declined. Rather than be a free man, Flamma preferred to stay as a slave and fight again and again. Apparently, he just wasn't impressed enough with himself and wanted to earn his freedom more times. It's recorded that he actually won his freedom and the famous wooden baton known as rudius that was so coveted by all other gladiators 4 different times. But he denied it each and every time so he could keep on fighting. Flamma was eventually killed during his 22nd arena fight at the tender age of 30. It has to be said that by any normal standards, this guy was at least a little bit sadistic and also a little bit out of his right mind. Number 5. Xiao Dun. Xiao Dun was one of the greatest military generals in the Han Dynasty. He was known widely throughout China as Blind Xiao, and he got his name because of a battle in which he got shot in the eye with an arrow. One of the legends says that Xiao actually pulled the arrow out of his eye socket and then popped his eyeball into his mouth and ate it to show off his ferocity. Nobody knows for sure if this actually happened, but it's one of the myths surrounding this incredible warrior. In fact, there is really not much more disturbing and terrifying than pulling out your own eye and eating it, let's be honest. This allowed him to become the brutal one-eyed warrior. While much of his life is shrouded in ancient Chinese politics having to do with different governors and provincial squabbles, the basic truth is that he was a savage warrior. He was also a great leader and led many successful campaigns against rival factions. He saved farmers from droughts and locust infestations, and he defended the homeland with brutal efficiency. He was eventually promoted to general in the year 204 and continued fighting all the way until 220, helping to defeat Emperor Xian before ultimately succumbing to nature. He died of natural causes several months after the death of his leader, Cao Cao. His story is part of the famous legendary Romance of the Three Kingdoms, one of the greatest tales in Chinese literary history. Number 4. Arminius. Arminius was born somewhere around 18 BC as the son of a German barbarian chief. However, Arminius ended up being captured as a child, and in the year 1 AD, he was forced to join the Roman army as a hostage. But this afforded him some pretty good training. He was trained in expert Roman military tactics and eventually became an actual Roman citizen. Little did the Romans know that later on, all that training would turn against them. The most impressive battle that Arminius is known for is the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. He first reported to his superiors that there was a rebellion going on in the north of Germany, persuading the leaders to divert 3 full legions to squash the rebellion. Of course, the rebellion was not real, and the 3 legions marched directly into a trap. Arminius ended up ambushing the Roman soldiers with his own men, killing about 20,000 people. By the time the Roman generals realized they had been outsmarted, it was too late. Arminius successfully destroyed the 3 legions and continued to drive the Romans out of Germany. This was one of the biggest defeats for the Roman Empire, and they were not very happy about it. They retaliated, but Arminius simply pushed them back every time, using his superior intellect and fighting skills. This story does take a pretty sad turn though, as Arminius was eventually married, only to have his wife captured by the Romans, and his son grow up in Roman custody just like he had. Arminius was then killed by a rival Germanic chief, not even by the Romans he had come to despise, and his story came to a tragic end. Number 3. Hut Yun. Hut Yun might be the most unique warrior of all time. She was a fearsome Mongolian princess, who according to Marco Polo himself, was so strong and powerful that she could have been a giantess. Her character was even dramatized on the recent television show Marco Polo. Hut Yun was the cousin of Kublai Khan, one of the most brutal Khans of all time, and grandson of the great Genghis Khan. Not only was she royalty, she was also one of the most skilled warriors in the Mongolian Empire. She was proficient in fighting, she was excellent on a horse, and she was one of the best wrestlers in the world. In fact, whenever she had a suitor ask for her hand in marriage, she forced them to fight her in a wrestling match. However, none of them could beat her in a match, and so she never got married to any of them. But she did collect horses from all the losing suitors until she had a collection of over 10,000 horses. That makes her one impressively tough lady. When her father was dying, he tried to name her the successor of the Mongolian Empire, but the military and political advisors would not allow a woman to rule anything, and so she never did get the throne. She did marry, though, after picking a man herself. She ended up guarding her father's tomb for 5 years after his death, until she eventually died as well. But she left quite the legacy behind. In Hannah Jewell's book, She Caused a Riot, she wrote that Hut Yun left the Mongolian steppes littered with debris of shattered male egos. If ever there was a woman worthy of being a feminist icon, it's Hut Yun. Number 2. Lu Bu. Lu Bu was another warrior from the era of the Han Dynasty, living in the same time as Xiao Dun. His nickname was the Invincible Warrior, as he was one of the most feared warriors in the entire country. Lu Bu was a master archer, a master horseman, and a master fighter in hand-to-hand combat. However, it's said that his loyalty was not very stable. He supposedly abandoned his family roots to join a rival master named Dong Zhu after he offered Lu Bu the fastest horse in the land. He gave up his loyalty for a horse. But then, when things began to go badly for his new lord, Lu Bu simply shrugged off his loyalty and assassinated him. He then spent most of his life wandering around central and northern China, associating with local warlords. He went on to defeat Cao Cao, the master of Xiao Dun, in a battle, but was eventually run off. Lu Bu joined forces with yet another warlord named Yan Shu and tried to defeat Cao Cao once and for all, but he was defeated with the help of Xiao Dun, the one-eyed warrior. This once invincible warrior was then put to death at the command of Cao Cao. Number 1. Prince Rupert of the Rhine. Prince Rupert of the Rhine was born in 1619 in Prague, now the capital of the Czech Republic. According to Britannica, he was the most talented commander of the English Civil War, which took place between 1642 and 1651. His tactical genius was unparalleled, and his technique as a cavalry officer has earned him a place in the halls of history as a seriously amazing warrior. Prince Rupert was the nephew of King Charles I and fought for him against the imperial forces in the 30 Years' War in the year 1638. However, this was in his youth, and he was captured and eventually held in Austria for 3 long years. After his release, Prince Rupert returned to England and joined forces with his uncle Charles I just before the outbreak of the Civil War. He received full command over the cavalry at this young age of 23 and led his troops to many victories. He took Bristol in 1643, Nottinghamshire in 1644, and most of Lancashire in the same year. Unfortunately, he was soundly defeated by Oliver Cromwell in Yorkshire, but despite his loss, Rupert was made the Duke of Cumberland and became the commander of the King's armies on November of 1644. His great military prowess went on for a little longer, but he was eventually defeated and forced to surrender the city of Bristol, at which point the king dismissed him from his command in 1646. After the king was defeated by the Scots, Rupert was banished from England. After his banishment, Rupert turned to piracy and moved to Germany, then was again given a position of naval command in the Third Dutch War. He even became the first governor of the Hudson's Bay Company in